Jordan, I'm sure everybody knows at this point that the House settlement has arrived last Friday, 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The House settlement dropped. The judge signed the settlement. We have the parameters of what will be the future of college football, at least for now. And there's a lot of different layers to the House versus NCAA settlement. There's a lot of different layers as far as NIL goes, revenue sharing goes, roster limits go, grandfathered in players as far as walk-ons and stuff. There's multi layers to this. But let's break it down in a couple different ways tonight, Jordan. We're going to talk about it mainly from a Clemson standpoint, but obviously from a overall holistic college football standpoint as well. You when you go through and you read some of the stuff that's coming out of the House settlement, it's exciting. If you're kind of a purist, if you're kind of a an OG college football fan, if you will, it looks like that it's going to get some of the nonsense that has driven us crazy for the past, 2 to 4 years at this point about college football, with NIL being dropped in everybody's lap, and there's no guidelines, there's no guardrails, there's no any enforcement on NIL. It essentially became not NIL, and it became pay for play. So just rich boosters were just throwing millions of dollars at high school athletes and other college athletes via the transfer portal to come play for their alma mater, right? That's essentially what NIL became in the wild, wild west version of college football that we've been in for quite some time now. One of the great things that is written into the House settlement is some guardrails when it comes to NIL. And this is kind of where I want to start, Jordan, is the NIL situation, because I feel like this has been one of the major issues plaguing college football in conjunction with the endless transfer portal team hopping cycle that we are in. So essentially, if you read the House versus NCAA settlement, there will be a third party committee that has to vet every single NIL deal that is above $600. The individual institutions, will have to report their NIL dealings with that particular player or that. And what will happen is they will vet it with not necessarily fair market value, because it's really hard to put a fair market value on marketing deals, right? Because traditionally, a marketing deal, right, Jordan? If I'm coming to you and I'm saying I'm going to give you a marketing deal and I have X company and I'm going to pay you to be the face of X company, right? You're essentially worth whatever I say you're worth, right? Whatever I'm willing to pay you to star in my commercials or make X amount of social media posts or whatever. But they're going to scrub these deals to see if they are within the parameters of other deals that are similar to them, if that makes sense to everybody. So not necessarily fair market value, because that's kind of a weird thing, and that gets into legalities and stuff like that. But Jordan, let's talk about this NIL thing specifically with the House settlement. Do you think that there will be any real parameters that are going to be able to be enforced with this new committee, with this new um, governing body, if you will, that will be vetting these NIL deals? How long do you think it's going to be before we see the first lawsuit because they deny a deal and tell a player that that's not a reasonable business practice when it comes to a marketing?
I don't think it's going to take long, to be honest with you. I mean, when you think about who is involved with all of this, it's not just people that have college football with their best interests in heart.
Right.
There are lawyers, there's politics involved. And I definitely think there's going to be some bad actors that are going to be willing to, jump on the first opportunity, the first time that somebody's NIL deal is voided or denied, jump all over that, drop a lawsuit
Right.
on the school, and because I do think there are a lot of bad actors, and I think that's the thing that I'm worried about. You mentioned the fair market value stuff too. I mean, obviously that's, as you mentioned, that's very subjective, and that's going to vary from place to place because, say you take a school like, I don't know, like a UCLA or something.
Yeah.
They're in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
but they're like at best like the I mean, numbers wise, they can't be a top 5, top 10 most watched brand in that state. Like, I mean, they're definitely, California's definitely much more a professional sports state. And then you've got, you've got USC, who absolutely in the same city that absolutely dwarfs UCLA in terms of viewership and all the metrics that you think of. So like, they're not even they wouldn't even be the most popular college in that large city. So, what for like a player that's getting, I don't know, Nico Iamaleava just transferred there, and say he's getting the what was it, the 5 million that he was asking for, whatever it was, 4.5 million. Like, is that really fair market value? You considering like what, where he is and from a geographical standpoint, and what, from a viewership standpoint, what he would bring. I mean, maybe
Right.
I don't know. So those are the things that you're going to have to consider as well. And like I said, there's going to be, all it takes is one time. You're going to see somebody that's trying, some lawyer, some firm that's trying to get attention, because that's what a lot of it is like, hey, I want to get noticed in the federal courts, and I want to bring a case to to the federal courts, and I don't really care about the well-being of college football. I don't watch it. I don't care about it, but it involves something that's going to make me money and get me attention. So I'm gonna be all over it. So that's the thing. That's the biggest thing for me, is like, how do you go about enforcing these things, without legal challenge? I don't think you can.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing for me, Jordan, and I think every college football fan that has closely paid attention to what has gone on the last, let's say, 3 to 4, maybe 5 years, right, in college football, and specifically, the University of Tennessee, right? If you look at the University of Tennessee, they kind of are the catalyst for where we are with NIL, right? It's the NCAA was looking into them with the Nico recruitment and what they were doing with NIL there. And then the state of Tennessee sues the NCAA. They win, obviously. It's all these antitrust lawsuits that are being levied against the NCAA. They lost every single one of them. So they lost all their teeth. They lost all their ability to enforce any rules. So what they did was throw their hands up and not enforce any rules. And, my question with this House settlement is, how long before another university, maybe it's Tennessee again, levies another lawsuit against the new governing body, if you will, this third party agency that's supposed to vet these NIL deals and make sure they're legitimate and make sure that they are a fair business practice and that they are a fair market value, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think it will be too long before that rears its ugly head in college football yet again. So while the House settlement, I think, brings some clarity to college football right now and probably brings a bit more parameters to the game of college football right now, it certainly does not solve all the problems in college football. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the good things that the House settlement does for college football, right? Obviously, there's revenue sharing now. Revenue sharing, in my opinion, has been a long awaited thing in college football. I think it should have been a thing long ago. And I think, honestly, if the NCAA would have gave a little bit more ground, 5-6 years ago, we would not be sitting in the situation that we are in currently as college football fans, right? But unfortunately, that did not happen, right? But now we are to a point where, the House settlement has been agreed upon. The judge signed it. There is a $2.8 billion settlement between athletes from now all the way back to, I think, 2016 that will receive payments for revenue that they should have gotten, right? That's great. I'm totally on board with that. I think that's awesome, right? One of the other great things that come is the $20.5 million per institution that they are allowed to now revenue share with their athletes. And it's up to each individual institution how they divvy that up between football, basketball, baseball, softball, whatever various sports that they have on campus, right? They can divvy that up in whatever way they will. Another thing that came out of the House versus NCAA settlement is rosters and what your roster is going to have to look like. Your roster is going to have to go down to 105 players. That's what it's going to have to go down to. Now, there are grandfathered in players currently, your walk-ons, your players like that are currently on the roster. You do not have to kick them off. But between now and like a 3-year span, rosters are going to go from, probably 120, 130 is what most college football rosters look like with the scout team and all that, down to 105. So coaches are going to have to get creative, right, about how they construct their rosters, how they do practice. There's probably going to be tweaks to how they run scout team, how they do various things in practice that they no longer have the bodies for. So your thoughts on kind of those aspects of the House versus NCAA settlement and how that's going to affect college football going forward?
Yeah, it's like you mentioned. It was nice to see them, kind of grandfather in, something the walk-ons that, so that way you're not just flat out cutting people,
just cutting dudes on July 1st and being like, hey, sorry, you didn't make the 105.
Yeah. So, that's good. I mean, you get some clarity. It's going to be, a lot more streamlined and simple as far as, I guess, at least roster management, numbers wise, and I think that's probably going to take a couple of years to truly sort out. But, at least you have some answers on how things are going to go in the immediate, because that was very much up in the air, and people we're not just talking about numbers here. I mean, we're talking about actual human being students, with that are trying to get education and live their lives that don't know whether or not they're going to be they're going to be able to play football, or do they need to transfer? Do they need to try and find an opportunity somewhere else, or are they just going to be done with football? So now, at least there's some answers there, and that way you're not, if, as an institution, you're not put in a terrible spot where you have to, basically screw over these kids that are hardworking parts of your program, and that you need, quite frankly. So. Yeah, and from a Clemson standpoint, I'm very interested to see how Dabo navigates it, because I know how he feels about walk-ons and how he loves the walk-on program here and how much he values them. So I wonder, what is he going to stay? Is he going to personally continue to take 85 schollies and maybe leave 20 roster spots for walk-ons? Is he going to you're going to see some schools potentially just completely do away with walk-ons, but I don't see Dabo doing that. So I'm interested
he will
to see
not.
how
He
Clemson
will not. Yeah, I'm almost certain Dabo Swinney will not do away completely with walk-ons, and when you think about it, you're talking about 105 people basically being on scholarship, right? That's a weird place to navigate. because usually teams are used to 85 scholarship athletes, right? You're going to 105, and that sounds great, but you're losing a lot of those walk-on pieces, and then you're talking about roster turnover a lot more when you're talking about 105 scholarship people versus 85 scholarship football players, right? Like it becomes a far more uphill feat to retain your roster when you have that many more people under scholarship, right? That expect to play. They expect to have an avenue to playing time and to, all these things, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how not only Dabo, but other coaches throughout, college football kind of navigate this new 105 roster and, how much of them still keep walk-ons, how much of them just kind of go to 105 just scholarship guys, period. It's going to be really interesting to see how teams divvy it up. It's also going to be really interesting. I think one of the points to mention is the $20.5 million in revenue sharing. That's across all sports. So I know us here as college football fans, we're talking about it from a sheer football standpoint, right? And make no mistake about it, almost every university in the country, most of the money will go to college football, right? It will go to the football team. Absolutely. But how do those universities divvy it up, right? How is Clemson going to divvy up that $20.5 million? What percentage is going to go to football? What percentage is going to go to basketball, baseball, so on and so forth with the 21 sports that Clemson has currently as a part of their athletic department, right? And then, when you think about this, one of the other things to bring up, Jordan, is Title IX. Where does Title IX play into all of this? Because, again, when you talk about lawsuits and we talked earlier about NIL and, who's going to be the first one to levy a lawsuit against this new committee or this new, governing body, if you will. Who's going to be the first student body or university or whatever entity to levy a lawsuit based on Title IX and the divvying up of this $20.5 million?
Yeah, that's another massive part of this equation, and it's something that the House settlement in generally kind of skirted around. During the proceedings, the judge that was overseeing, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. She was very very reluctant. She said, I'm not really even going to touch that right now. So
if I was her, I wouldn't either.
yeah, I don't blame her because it's a very that's a very touchy fine line you have to walk, with with how you go about talking about it. So that's the thing, and because this revenue sharing money is, I believe it's considered academic money, or scholarship money is considered academic money. So when you think about it from that standpoint, you can use your revenue sharing to fund scholarships and stuff like that. Those things are also that also kind of muddies the water a little bit in terms of how you go about doing things. Now, I think there are ways for schools to probably be kind of skirt around some of the guardrails with how they report the spending. There's some financial tricks and things you can do, underhanded things that you could probably do to keep some things off the books, or report it in a way that it doesn't raise flags in terms of like Title IX and stuff like that. But that's going to be a burning question at a lot of places, is okay, how do we go about divvying this up in a way where we're not we're not perceived as favoring sports, based
Right.
on, especially based on gender. So, that's going
Yeah,
to be
that's
something
a
that
that's
I
a
think.
big one. And talking about all of this stuff, it's as many questions or I guess as many answers as this House settlement gives, it begs a whole bunch more questions, right? Like I think one of the things that college football fans, especially people that follows the sport as closely as we do, Jordan, and kind of are in tune with things that have happened within the sport and pay attention to the nuances of what happens in the sport, we can see the friction points of what is going to happen with this house settlement, right? The enforcement of the private equity or the private business NIL portion of this. That's going to be really hard to enforce, right? The second that a university or an individual player brings a lawsuit, I think they lose immediately, right? And that's one of the unfortunate things that I kind of foresee. I also foresee a Title IX lawsuit when it comes to this, because I think most universities are going to lean heavy into football. I think Clemson's going to be one of those universities that lean extremely heavy into football because that's the bread and butter of Clemson, right? That's where the revenue comes from. Yeah, maybe a little bit of men's basketball, but I mean, 95% of the revenue in the athletic department at Clemson comes from the football team. And rightfully so, the football team's going to be like, well, then we should get 90 to 95% of the revenue sharing, right? Like, so I foresee those things happening. Another thing that you foresee happening is just kind of, are we going to get to a point in college? Like, have we gotten to a point in college athletics where it's been professionalized to a point where we are going to start cutting non-revenue generating sports, right? And I think that's a real conversation that universities are going to start having within their athletic department. And that's sad to me because I don't want to see non-revenue generating sports, your Olympic sports, your whatever sport you want to name, gymnastics, softball, lacrosse, like whatever sport you want to name that is non-revenue generating. I don't want to see those go away. But we may get to a point within college athletics because of the professionalism of it, that universities may have to cut sports, and that's unfortunate. And that's not what I want to see happen. So, it's as exciting as it is to get guardrails around the sport of college football, and I think the House versus NCAA does some of that. It certainly does not solve even a fraction of the problems that are within college athletics right now. And I don't know the answer to everything. Honestly, maybe outside of college athletes becoming employees and unionizing and collectively bargaining, I don't know that we solve all of these issues, because without a collective bargaining, there's going to be antitrust law after antitrust law after antitrust law, and it's going to be a cycle of all of this. So I don't know where we go in college football at this point, or college athletics as a whole. It's a complicated time. We're getting some answers now with the House settlement, and that's great. But again, me personally, I think it raises a lot more questions than really gives true answers of where we're going when it comes to college athletics.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. It's answered some questions. It's given clarity on some things, but it's also opened the can of worms and opened the door for a million other things that we just have no idea how all of that is going to play out. And at this point, we'll address it when we get to it, I guess. I mean, that's kind of the mentality. We'll plug this hole here, and even if a couple more holes in the boat start leaking, we'll at least have answered this or taken care of this one. So, that's kind
always reactionary. It's never forward thinking. It's never seeing all the avenues that are going to come and having an answer for everything. It's just, we make this decision and then we react, and then we make this decision and then we react. It's quite frustrating. We need a governing body in college athletics that actually has teeth, that actually can lay out guidelines and rules. And I don't know if we ever get there outside of athletes becoming employees and unionizing and collectively bargaining. That may be the only way. I don't know. Again, there's people out there a lot smarter than me in college athletics that I'm sure have other perspectives, but that's just kind of where I'm at. I am excited about the House versus NCAA settlement, but there's still a lot of questions. There's still a lot of problems within the sport of college football and then college athletics as a whole. And we are far from figuring out where we are going to be in the modern age of college athletics.